Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here on MMA Junkie, we take you on a quick spin through the week's news. And we've got some luminaries on the show for you this week. We've got gorgeous George from MMA Junkie Radio and from MMAJunkie.com. We've got Mike Bohn and John Morgan. It should be a good one. So let's get straight into it. And the stakes are high this weekend in the main event at UFC on ESPN plus 35 this weekend. The former interim champion Colby Covington takes on former undisputed champion Tyron Woodley in a battle of 170-pound greats. Both men are heading into the bout after recent losses, but who has the most to gain this weekend, and which of the pair will suffer the most if they lose? Let's have your rapid-fire breakdowns on what's at stake this weekend, guys. We'll put 3 minutes on the clock. John, you can lead us off.
It's interesting, right? I mean, obviously reputations are on the line. I mean, this is a grudge match and we know the bad blood is there. So, I mean, that's on the line, but you know, that fades in time, right? What's really on the line is career stakes. And I think the biggest chance at failure is Tyron Woodley, man. I mean, if he's not to look good here, that's a very, very big setback for him. We're talking about, 2 losses in a row. He hasn't won since 2018. And he hasn't looked particularly competitive in the 2 fights he lost. So I don't want to put him down. We still know what he's capable of, but a third loss would be terrible. Colby Covington, listen, I know people want to hate on him. They don't like the guy. But he looked fantastic last time out. It was an amazing fight. And if he loses, yes, it'll put him back to the back of the line. But I think, he's still got a couple of years left. And, man, he can always start talking a little smack and get himself involved in a big fight. So, honestly, man, I feel like the biggest risk here is for Tyron Woodley, man. He has got to come out of here with a victory.
Yeah, it's a big, big fight, George. Who do you think's most at risk going into this one?
I would agree with John. Tyron Woodley's 38, Colby's 32, so he's got time on his side. Colby does. Woodley's lost 2 fights in a row, and neither one has really been too competitive. And it's to the 2 individuals that will be fighting for the undisputed title. Kamaru Usman defending against Durinho. So Colby did look good in that fight that he had against Usman. And, a lot of people were talking about, hey, let's run it back. But because it's such a deep division, I think it fell under the category of, but you got to win one first. You do that, and then we're talking. And this is the fight. If he can do it against a former champion and a heated rival, a former teammate, American top team teammate, this would be huge, huge for Colby Covington. He stands the most to gain. And the flip side is Woodley stands the most to lose just because, again, his age, and this would be 3 in a row for him. So that's my little breakdown of what I see this fight. This fight's got a lot of implications, man.
Yeah, it's a big fight for both guys. Are we going to see a return of the Tyron Woodley who dominated the division, Mike, or do you think Colby's going to just outpace him through this one?
Well, if there was going to be a time for Woodley, I guess, to turn back the clock or whatever, it would be this fight. I mean, there should be no lack of motivation here. There should be, he knows what's at stake. If you've seen the interviews he's done, his coaches have done, they said that they know they kind of need to go back to a dark place for him in this fight in order to let his hands go. He's bowing to the fans. He's not going to be hesitant in this fight. So Tyron Woodley's putting a lot of pressure on himself here. And this is a fight, coming off those 2 losses, maybe seemed like Woodley would be in a situation where he would have to fight with more to lose than to gain. There's definitely a lot to lose for him here, but he can rebound and he can really put himself back on the top of this division if he wins this fight. But if he loses and wants to continue going after this, he's going to be put in some real tough fights, some fights where he's probably going to be fighting up-and-comers, guys who can make their name off him. So Woodley, this is really his last chance to get back up there, and I think it's going to be a really tough road for him if he loses this fight. So I think, as John said earlier, for Colby Covington, even if he loses here, there's still some things he can do to get himself back in the mix. But Tyron Woodley, I just don't see it that same way.
Yeah, massive fight at 170 pounds. And speaking of former interim champions, guys, according to UFC President Dana White, the mooted matchup between former interim lightweight champions Tony Ferguson and Dustin Poirier is not salvageable. And the UFC are now going to move on from that matchup, which is a great shame to many of us who are hoping to see that one. Tony Ferguson wants the matchup to stay intact as well, but White says they're now looking for another matchup for El Kukui. So, given the fact that they're now not facing each other, who do you guys want to see Ferguson and Poirier face in their next matchup? So, book them both for us. We'll put 3 minutes on the clock. Mike, you can go first.
Well, I don't want to disrespect the question here, so I guess just right at the beginning, I'll say if we have to pick other fights, I'd love to see Tony Ferguson and Charles Oliveira, and then Dustin Poirier against Michael Chandler if they can get him signed to the UFC. But when we say it's unsalvageable, when Dana White says it's unsalvageable, I guess that really comes down to Tony Ferguson. He seems to have dug his heels in a little bit, and we'll see what he does here. If he says, I'm not fighting anyone else besides Dustin Poirier, then what does the UFC do? Do they go back to Dustin Poirier? I'm really curious to know exactly what happened there. I mean, it seems like they just weren't able to meet financial terms, but curious to know exactly what that was, because Dustin Poirier, in my experience, not an unreasonable guy. He seemed to have a good relationship with the UFC over his entire tenure. And I think whatever he's probably asking for is somewhat reasonable, at least in his mind. So hopefully they can work it out. You know, Poirier is a guy, top 10 in UFC wins, top 10 most bonuses ever. He's a guy who I think has earned a payday, earned this type of fight. And hopefully if him and Ferguson kind of align each other here to make this fight happen, maybe they can get it done.
Well, that would be fantastic if that happened. John, do you think there's a chance of that? And if they don't, how would you book them both?
Yeah, first off, I'll just be honest. I'm not giving up on it yet either. I mean, the way it was so nonchalantly said by Dana, like, nah, we're moving on. Nah, it's not happening. You know, we got something else on it. Made me think like, maybe we're just doing a little negotiating. And then, you know, as kind of Mike alluded to as well, you know, for Tony Ferguson to come out in support of Dustin and saying, you know, let's get this guy paid and do it. So I'm not giving up on it just yet. But if I gotta rebook some fights to say it's not happening, let me start with Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor, the rematch, right? Years down the line, there's history between the two of them. Let's see how the P-head can do these days around here at lightweight, man. I like that as the rematch. And then a little bit of a wild card here. Give me Tony Ferguson versus Michael Chandler, man. I had kind of held out hope that Michael Chandler might stay at Bellator and kind of finish out as a company man there, a career guy. But it seems the writing's on the wall that he wants to come to the UFC and test himself. And, man, what better way to jump into the deep end than with El Kukui?
George, what do you make of this whole situation? Do you think that this fight could still be salvageable?
Salvageable, yes, it is, because like John said, Dana didn't. I mean, you know, I guess he answered the question directly, quickly, but still, I think Dana's past has led us to believe that this could just be negotiations. This way of letting us know that, hey, look, we're in communication, but we're not in agreement yet, and there's still a little bit of time, but not a lot of it. But still, look, if it is unsalvageable, I like that name, Michael Chandler, being thrown around for sure. I really do. I mean, if you're going to bring in a former Bellator champion who's an exciting fighter, who's a main stage type of fighter, hey, yeah, against Ferguson or Poirier works for me. I also think there's a Poirier card to be played here. Poirier is about 6 weeks away from finding out if Gaethje might wind up being the undisputed champion. And if he is, remember, he has a win against them in the past, and I just wonder if maybe he could play that card then and just maybe sit it out right now and hold on to that prize that he's seeking. However, I do want to throw one other name out there. Man, Beneil Dariush's won 5 in a row, and he is exciting. I think he deserves either one of these guys. He will set the fight on October 4th, put him on October 24th against Ferguson if we do that Poirier card that I mentioned.
Options galore at 155 pounds in the UFC, and I guess what we've learned is never say never in the UFC. Now, moving on, the biggest controversy of the weekend came in the bout between Mike Rodriguez and Ed Herman at the UFC Apex, where referee Chris Tyron ruled that a Rodriguez knee went below the belt and it turned the fight on its head. The shot clearly hit Herman in the body, but short fuse was given time to recover before then going on to claim a dramatic late submission win. Now, it's the sort of incident, guys, that could have been amended via instant replay had that facility been available to the referee during that stoppage. But the rules didn't allow for that option at that time. So the question I have is, do we need to make this sort of technology more available to officials in situations like this to make sure they get these decisions right? Or do we need to just accept that this is a human sport and that the referees are going to make mistakes and we just accept their calls, warts and all? Do we go for tech or no tech? What say you guys? We'll put 2 minutes on the clock for this one. George, you can go first.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of slowing down the game more than it needs to be. At the same time, I do like it for them to get it right. Kudos to the UFC for paying Rodriguez his win bonus. But in this instance, the problem is I want every state, I want all the rules to be observed the same way. And if we're hopefully going to do something like that in Nevada, I would want all the states to do it. And since I don't sense that happening, I'd rather just say, look, we've covered Tyone for a long time. John and I have called his fights all the way from the amateur scene. Excuse me, not his fights, but the ones he's participated as a referee. And my understanding is that, from watching him, he doesn't make too many mistakes. This was a bad night. So no instant replay as of right now. But that was a terrible mistake.
Yeah. I think that's why it stood out so much, because we don't normally see them from him. Mike, what was your take on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see instant replay in some circumstances. Like in this scenario, if you were going to give the guy 5 minutes for a low blow anyways, that gives you plenty of time to just go look at the replay and get it right in that scenario. But if you're talking about like a live action, trying to differentiate whether it was a finger or a knuckle and an eye and something like that, if a guy reacts weird, there's a lot of things where using instant replay, as George said, would kind of slow the fight down and maybe not be in the best benefit. I think in some ways we have to just accept the human error element of the sport, as you kind of mentioned in the question. But there is obviously scenarios where instant replay would be hugely beneficial, and hopefully we can move forward into that. I'm a proponent of it. We see it in every other sport, how heavily they use it. I know in like NBA games and stuff, it slows it way down at the end, but I think it's an important thing to have in all sports, and I'd like to see it adopted further in MMA.
What do you reckon, John?
I reckon Mike needs to start looking at a clock and leave me some time to work, man. Yes, no, let's bring it in. I agree with what George said. Consistency would be tough, but man, we got to get the consistency. So let's work to make it done. But let's get it done. Let's make sure we're getting it right, especially at the UFC level. Wouldn't be able to do it with some of the regional shows, I'm sure, but come on, man. At least at the UFC, the highest level, they've got the finance, they got the tech available. Yes, let's get in. Let's get things right during these timeouts.
Yeah, absolutely. And to finish things off this week, guys, Bellator crowned a new champion on Saturday night when Juan Archuleta claimed the promotion's vacant bantamweight belt at Bellator 246. That means we've now seen 3 new champions crowned inside the Bellator cage so far in 2020. But who's going to be next? The promotion is getting set to ramp up their event schedule. We've got more event dates coming on stream now, so title fights are likely to come thick and fast from here on in. So who's the next Bellator fighter to hear the words "and new"? We'll put 2 minutes on the clock to finish off. John, you can go first.
All right, 2 minutes on the clock, and Mike's going last. So if I just use up all the time I want, I can stick him in a similar situation. No, listen, I won't do that. To me, listen, I'm going to cheat a little bit because it's a guy that's already and still, but I think he's going to be and new as well. I like Douglas Lima's chances in moving up to middleweight. Man, this guy is firing on all cylinders, and he looks like every bit the real deal to me. We've got that fight rescheduled happening later this year. Technically, you could cheat and just say it's an interim title, so somebody's going to be and new anyway. But I like Douglas Lima. A little bit of a cheating answer, but, man, I think he's going to pick up that second belt. And like I said, the guy is just at the top of his game right now, and I think he's primed to win this fight.
What do you reckon, George?
That's a good one, John. You're making me go into my number 2. Look, if Pettis were to fight Archuleta, I think that would be potential, but it just happened. So I know other fighters are in more of a rotation where this can happen. I think Bader's got to defend at some point. I would love to see one more run for the Last Emperor. I was there when Bader knocked him out. But the Last Emperor still throws hard. I think the Last Emperor should get another shot. I think he could even it up and then set up a potential trilogy. So give me Fedor for the next and new over at Bellator.
That would be quite something. Wow. Mike, what do you think?
Well, I mean, you look at these, I think the Bellator champions are in a pretty good spot right now. I don't think Chris Cyborg's losing it anytime soon. I think Alima Lay McFarlane has her division pretty well unlocked. So honestly, if you look at things right now, I don't think there's a title fight coming up where I know John said, Musashi and Lima is for a vacant belt. So it's going to be an and new there regardless. But the rest, I kind of see them being there for a while. I'd really want to see Patricio Pitbull and AJ McKee eventually fight. I know they have to win some tournament bouts, but when that eventually lines up, I think that might be AJ McKee's breakthrough moment.
Yeah, it's a fight that's a long time in the making. So will we see that as that tournament goes on? I'll give you 2 names. Vitaly Minakov at heavyweight. I think he's the heavyweight champion in waiting. And don't rule out Kyoji Horiguchi coming back and doing something in that bantamweight division. Lots to look forward to in Bellator as they start to ramp up that event schedule towards the end of this year. But that is all we got time for on this week's show. A huge thank you to Mike Bohn, to John Morgan, and to gorgeous George Garcia. And a big thank you to Goes for stepping into the production seat this week behind the scenes. We'll bring you comprehensive coverage throughout Fight Week as we bring you up to speed on UFC on ESPN Plus 36. Covington versus Woodley. It's a stacked fight card, a ton of storylines heading into fight night to keep it locked at MMA Junkie all week. And we'll talk about it all next week.